I've never been more disappointed not seeing a movie in theaters.
You do know Elvis is dead, right?
No, Elvis is not dead. He just went home.
The king of rock and roll. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't get into Elvis until about 3 to 4 years ago. Since then, I've listened to him pretty casually. I personally prefer Johnny Cash to Elvis, primarily due to me seeing him as more of a role model figure. Cash seemed realer, more down to earth, but Elvis had a mystique about him, a larger-than-life presence about him that made him come off almost like a myth. That's why I was skeptical about an Elvis biopic. Personally, I wanted to sustain that image of him in my head. The king, the myth, the larger-than-life individual. But Baz Luhrmann had other plans, and, well, what we got was something. I think biopics have to be careful, not only of telling a fabricated fiction where the movie we're watching very loosely resembles the reality of the situation.
And the big Live Aid concert that is enough for them to put their differences aside and do it one more time for Freddie because he has AIDS. He didn't get diagnosed with AIDS until 3 years after that.
Lying! Just flat out fucking lying!
But careful in that the movie doesn't just show us their life, it also needs to celebrate it. I think the Elvis movie excels in these departments at times. You can tell Baz is a big fan of Elvis and he did his research, but I think his first mistake was trying to make a movie centered around Elvis's entire career. That's a lot of ground to cover, and due to that, Baz very often relies on montages or quick cuts to show a passing of time, and definitely not to just get us to the next set piece, oh no. So Baz's goal was to cover the entire career of Elvis Presley in 2.5 hours. I don't think that cut it. If I were a Warner Brothers executive, I would have advocated for a 5 to 6 part miniseries as opposed to a movie. Granted, you won't be reaching the masses that way, however, I believe that approach would have provided a cleaner and overall more coherent product. I guess that's the first thing I should talk about. The fucking editor must have been snorting lines before he went into work.
Tight, yeah!
There's pacing issues galore and it's all utilized just to speed up the passage of time. Baz's visual flair throughout this movie is a bit too grandiose for my liking, especially in the earlier years of the King's career when it doesn't really feel like we're in Southern America at all. It feels like we're in Australia. Would you fucking guess why? There is a point, however, when Elvis begins playing in Vegas and what you're watching combined with the excessive energy Baz puts into his editing finally catches up with each other. And I'm not gonna lie, I think it works well. An hour and 40 minutes into the movie. Everything before then from an editing standpoint felt very out of place and even more so unnecessary. In regards to the overall story, like I said, Baz might have bit off a little more than he could chew, but to be fair, it is Elvis. However, when you're tackling someone's entire career, I think a 5 to 6 part miniseries would have sufficed. It would remove the need for these flashy montages, and I also think it would allow Elvis to be more of a character in his own story. Elvis really doesn't feel like a character until about 45 minutes into the movie when he starts making decisions for himself away from Colonel Tom Parker. There's very little independence given to Elvis before then. He's more of a presence rather than a character until that 45-minute mark. None of this blame is put on the performances. The true culprit is the script. The story is narrated by Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, and there are some negatives and positives that come along with this. I think it's a smart choice to have the story be from his POV if you want to humanize Elvis via the moments Colonel Parker would have been there, but also maintain the larger-than-life image of Elvis even if it doesn't give you the full view of either perspectives. But the issue I noticed with this framing device is the movie basically operates as a crash course for Elvis's life, transporting the viewers via editing to these highlighted moments of his career, as opposed to having a very coherent narrative. This really is an example of and then storytelling until the third act where shit starts hitting the fan and it dawns on Elvis that he is a prisoner of his own success. That's where I found the meat of the movie was, when he's confronting the Colonel, cussing him out. It was glorious because Elvis came across like he just woke up from a dream. He realizes he was a puppet on the Colonel's strings and with all of his power he wants to fight it, but he's in too deep. And I know that's the point of this story. Everything I've heard about Elvis paints him as sort of naive, but you can still characterize that throughout the movie. It can still make sense. Give me a reason why Elvis would trust Colonel Tom Parker when a lot of the examples in this movie depict the opposite. Baz wanted to tell a story about success and exploitation, but in doing so, failed to give Elvis proper characterization in favor of set pieces. Now, let's get into casting. Austin Butler's come a long way since Zoe 101. He was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, The Dead Don't Die, and he's going to be in the next Dune movie, so I'm happy his career is taking off, but how is he as Elvis? Well, he's pretty good. He doesn't look anything like Elvis, and I think he's overworking it with the accent, as are a lot of the actors. However, his performance lands far from an impression, and to be fair, I can't think of anyone else in acting more suited to portray Elvis Presley. More specifically, a younger Elvis. He near perfectly captures the rebelliousness and charisma that we've all heard so much about. I think the cracks in the performance begin to show, however, when he's supposed to be portraying Elvis later in his years, which is not a slander on Austin at all, but Baz's direction. Like, you really just couldn't give him puffier cheeks? We can remake young Mark Hamill, but you couldn't give Austin Butler puffier cheeks until Unchained Melody? Okay. It's hard to believe this character has aged at all or is going through immense emotional distress when he looks just as young as when he started. This is why I don't believe feature film biopics should focus on an entire artist's career. Walk the Line focused on the first half of Johnny Cash's career, and while Joaquin Phoenix doesn't look nearly as aged as Johnny Cash was at the time, James Mangold was smart enough to know he can't fit an entire man's career in only 2.5 hours. Walk the Line ends in 1968, only 13 years after Johnny Cash started performing. Elvis the movie stretches over 21 years. That's a big difference. Also, I gotta show you guys this. I don't blame the studio at all for not going this route, but this is a really cool deepfake.
It was a particular experience because the role itself requires me to dig into...
Yeah, that's Austin Butler with Elvis's face. It ain't perfect, but Jesus, if a fan can do this, if just some guy can do this, what could a studio with millions of dollars in investment come up with? Granted, deepfakes are a lot of work and they're not perfected yet, but we have technology. I just wanted to show you guys because, I don't know, I think it's neat. I gotta give credit where credit is due though. Austin can emulate Elvis very well. There are a few moments, specifically during wide shots, where I was watching and thought, that's it. That's the guy. He definitely isn't playing a caricature nor a mere impersonation, and it seemed like he knew he couldn't based on how he approached this role.
I mean, it's the biggest responsibility I've ever felt. You feel such a responsibility to him, to his family, to all the people around the world who love him so much, and so it's terrifying.
There seemed to be a lot of respect present. He knew the weight this role would have, and in my opinion, I think he absolutely delivered. Tom Hanks is acting. Look at him go. Yeah, it's very rare when Tom fucking Hanks gets outshined in a movie, but here we are. He's basically the exact opposite of Austin Butler's performance in this. He's playing a cartoon villain. Even with his POV throughout the story, there's very few humanizing traits that make him feel like a real person. He's also doing this really heavy Dutch accent in the movie when the real Tom Parker didn't have nearly as strong of an accent.
More often is, to my way of thinking, many of the artists today are overexposed on television.
There are some who'd make me out to be the villain.
My theory is that this exists to make the Colonel seem more alien to the audience. There are also quite a few moments of Tom Hanks blatantly overacting. This is just not a very convincing performance. To be fair, kinda hard to blame him for that when you're in a Baz Luhrmann movie, but there are literal scenes where he's the devil on everyone's shoulders, whispering in their ears, and it feels so manipulative on the film's end. Like, you really want us to not like him, do you? To be fair, Tom Parker is a really despised individual when it comes to Elvis, but this is unnecessary. Just depict him how he naturally was and let the audience make up their own minds. Priscilla Presley is portrayed by Olivia DeJonge. I wish I had more to say about her. I think she embodies Priscilla pretty well. She gives a strong performance, but it's hard to say she has a character. She really just serves as a romantic foil to Elvis until the inevitable split. We get some very quick moments of them together, and from what I've heard, that's sort of how their life was, very busy. But I personally would have appreciated some more intimate moments between them. You know, like, what does she think about the Colonel, or the Memphis Mafia, or even Elvis's performances? I don't know, I guess I gotta go watch interviews to find out. Now, Elvis's performances were so electric, and that translates very well to this movie. It's common now to get an electric performance, but this guy pioneered it. I mean, hell, he was threatened with being arrested just for dancing. Before him, we had Sinatra and Nat King Cole, but nothing attracted young adults and teens like the energy of his hip gyrations. Like, look at this man, he didn't give a fuck!
I don't give a fuck!
He's feeling himself, he's so extra and I fucking love it. The performances in this movie, specifically during the '68 comeback special, genuinely made me feel ashamed for not seeing this in the theater because, goddamn, look at this guy. In fact, look at them side by side. Apparently Austin sang a lot of the songs as well, more specifically the earlier songs like Baby Let's Play House and Trouble, but when it came to the later stuff, they blended Elvis's performance and Austin's together. Since we're generally speaking about the music, I think it's only appropriate to talk about the soundtrack of the movie. Okay, you got artists of the time like B.B. King, Little Richard, Big Mama Thornton, Johnny Cash, Nat King Cole, Jerry Lee Lewis, Frank Sinatra, all artists from this time period you could utilize. So why is Doja Cat, Eminem, Sway Lee, and Denzel Curry in my fucking Elvis movie?
What the fuck?
Why is the sound effect from Britney Spears' Toxic in my fucking Elvis movie? There's more songs than the world knows what to do with from any of these artists. Why didn't you use them to your advantage, Baz? Why didn't you use Elvis's own songs to help progress the narrative, Baz? Was your goal to try to make this movie cool and hip to the kids who will see this? Are you implying this music is not cool? Because that's a horrific way to approach the soundtrack of your movie, especially when it takes place in a time period where this music was popular. Because of that, you ended up with a soundtrack that comes across like you don't have faith in the music that you're making a movie about. I'm completely floored by this decision. Alright, so I'm desiring more about Elvis the person, not the icon. At this point of his life, how does he feel about everything that's happened to him? How does he feel about Priscilla or Lisa Marie or his long past mother? I know I advocate for show don't tell a lot in media, but this is one of those rare times where I'll advocate for the opposite. Tell me how you feel, Elvis Presley. Him saying he doesn't have any more dreams is something. But that's all of the something. It's just not enough based on how much time we spent with him. So, naturally an Elvis film should focus on some of Elvis's more controversial choices throughout his life, right? Well, they leave out one I think definitely shouldn't have been avoided, and that is Priscilla's age when she and Elvis met. For those of you who don't know, Elvis was 24 and Priscilla was only 14 when they met.
Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
People can sit on their "it's a product of its time" or "he's a groomer" benches. I'm not touching that conversation. But this should not have been left out of the film. Confront it.
Coward.
Don't shy away from some of the more sketchy and controversial aspects of his life, especially if you're doing a biopic. As a viewer and as a fan of Elvis, I'd like to see the hard truth behind the king as opposed to the glossy portrayal Baz would prefer to portray. I'd prefer an ugly truth as opposed to a glamorous lie. A hot topic the movie does choose to focus on, however, is the idea that Elvis appropriated black music from black songwriters. And while I may believe he did, I never understood why people see that as a clear reason to despise him. Yes, he played songs like Hound Dog by Big Mama Thornton and Fever by Little Willie John. Yes, these songs became popularly recognized with Elvis. But I don't see a reason why he wouldn't play these songs if he loved them so much. Especially in an era where segregation laws were preventing black musicians from gaining the same success Elvis was. Even though Nat King Cole had his own television show, the show failed to be sustainable due to the racial biases of the time. In short, I'm not going to blame Elvis for becoming popular. I would argue that Elvis popularized the songs, and the result of doing so involved musicians or general people who had an interest choosing to look up the original creators and checking them out. The movie can stretch the inspiration factor quite a bit. For one, the movie claims he and B.B. King were good friends when in reality they just linked up once or twice backstage. This is one of those fictional moments used to leverage the perspective that Elvis was tightly woven within the black community, which was kinda true. He lived in black communities growing up. I'm sure the music he was exposed to and the people who taught him were very important to his formative years, but you don't need to alter history to get that point across. Some other moments that are fabricated is the idea that Elvis's '68 comeback special was supposed to be a Christmas extravaganza. I can see why this was changed. It's an easy opportunity to depict the Colonel as a direct antagonist to Elvis. Another example is Elvis firing the Colonel on stage. No, this never happened. This is fabricated for sole dramatic purposes.
Lying!
According to Alana Nash, who wrote The Colonel, The Extraordinary Story of Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis Presley, Elvis and Parker had an argument that threatened both of their positions, but it was never brought onto the stage. Elvis being drafted was probably a shock to Elvis, yes. I'm even sure he might have tried to get out of it, but upon hearing he couldn't, decided to go willingly. That's not dissimilar to what happens in the movie, except it wasn't transformed into a stunt to clean up his all-American image. Elvis didn't want to go because of a commitment he made with Paramount to film his movie King Kroll. Also, the movie presents the bill Parker charges Elvis with to end their contract as $8.5 million. But according to Wikipedia, the sum was closer to $2 million. Definitely some exaggeration there, but the point remains the same, so it doesn't really bother me that much. In the end, Elvis literally couldn't afford to fire Tom Parker. Something I found interesting is that Colonel Tom Parker in the movie claims Elvis was the highest paid actor of the time. But when I do a quick Wikipedia search, he doesn't show up anywhere, even in the up until 1966 section. He's nowhere to be seen. Another article highlights that Elvis made over $2 billion from his movies, which should undoubtedly put him on this list, so I don't know, we got some differing reports here. To cap this review off, I think if you have even a sliver of interest in Elvis, you should watch this movie. It essentially serves as a crash course of Elvis's life and career, but if you want something a little more grounded, I'd recommend John Carpenter's Elvis series starring Kurt Russell. Yeah, you fucking heard that right. I still would have preferred a miniseries or perhaps an extended version of this. There's so many moments in his life that could have been touched on, like the $1 Million Quartet, which was a 2-hour jam session between Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Johnny Cash, and Elvis Presley. Or his time in Germany performing for soldiers. Maybe you could introduce Anne Margaret, maybe throw hints of the Fool's Gold Loaf, somewhere to dive into his mindset, or you could just give us more character moments with Elvis, the man behind the myth. Doing that may have to remove the Tom Parker narration, but I mean, fuck it, I'll take more character work with Elvis than Tom Hanks' cringy accent. If you guys want to know more about some of the missed opportunities this movie could have taken advantage of, I recommend ANDINI's video on the movie. I'll link the video in the description so you guys can check it out yourselves. I can't in good conscience say this is a good movie based on how sloppy the editing is, how coked out the pacing is, the circus-like unfocused roller coaster of a plot, the out-of-place soundtrack, and the lack of humanity given to Elvis. But the inner Elvis fan in me had a lot of fun. The performances are ecstatic. Austin Butler shines very well in this movie, and it did a solid job in emphasizing Newton's fourth law of physics, which is nobody is cooler than Elvis. The movie is definitely a celebration not only of his career, but the cultural impact he left. The myth that I envisioned Elvis as still stands strong because of this movie. However, this is one of those examples where I almost wish it didn't. I wish I could have gotten to know Elvis Presley, the man behind the myth, how he felt about people, the popularity he had, and the absolutely insane life he led. And I think that is this movie's greatest missed opportunity and failure. Instead, the movie decided to focus on the icon whose record sales could only be outdone by the Beatles, who had the first international satellite live show garnering 1.5 billion viewers worldwide, and the icon who showed even in his worst shape he was born to perform and did so with as much grace and power as the day he started. But to me, the icon isn't the person. Elvis was the rebel hound dog, he was the worldwide performer in Hawaii, and he was the Las Vegas superstar. But Elvis the person remains an enigma. Elvis's impact can still be felt all over the world, and not just in Elvis-based media. Anytime you see a musical artist dancing on stage, or you hear "Can't Help Falling in Love" at a wedding, you can thank the king. But for me personally, I'll thank him for a little song he sang in a little studio on June 29th, 1968, singing as if he still had something to prove, singing about the pain currently present in the world after Martin Luther King's death, and singing with all the passion he could muster in his body and in his soul. The world may never see another like him.